Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.
Democratic Representative Mark Spreitzer of Beloit is seeking re-election in Assembly District 45. Mark, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thank you.
You're a leader of Assembly Democrats. So here's my first question. Why are Democrats so convinced that they have a winning issue in the Foxconn contract?
Well, Foxconn is just a bad deal for the state of Wisconsin, and when it first came out, it looked like maybe this was going to be a good deal, but the more we learned about it, the more details came out, the worse of a deal it became. And that's particularly true for anybody who doesn't live in southeastern Wisconsin, where Foxconn is actually locating, although I would argue that even in that region, it's not a good deal. The bottom line is that state taxpayers are paying much more to Foxconn over the next 15 or more years than we're getting back in tax dollars from Foxconn's employees, and that even before they step foot here, Foxconn as a manufacturer would have paid almost no taxes to begin with, so we're literally writing them a check every year. And that's just not the right way to incentivize business. We do economic development deals all the time that pay off, but this is one that is not going to pay off for a very long time, if ever, and I think that money could have been much better spent supporting business development all across the state, not putting all our eggs in one basket with one company in one part of the state that also is potentially going to hurt wetlands and take water out of Lake Michigan, and there's just a lot of other issues that I think make this a bad deal.
Just to follow up, the governor's office, of course, says, look, Foxconn, $100 million for the UW-Madison, $25 million for a business consortium in Milwaukee, their North American headquarters in Milwaukee, and innovation centers in Green Bay and Eau Claire. Still a bad investment.
That $100 million or that $25 million, that's a fraction of the $3 billion in very direct spending that the state of Wisconsin's doing, about a $4.5 billion total price tag if you add up local public costs. So that's a small fraction of what the public is actually paying for this. And of course we appreciate the investment in the UW system or in other business development, but we could get that much more directly by simply supporting the UW system with the state tax dollars that we are instead sending to Foxconn.
And there's no reason to extend the same type of tax breaks and incentives to Kimberly-Clark, correct?
Correct. It's a bad deal with Foxconn, and I don't think we want to extend that precedent farther. The bottom line here is this deal would subsidize 17% of Foxconn's payroll, or Kimberly-Clark's payroll if we extended it there, and that's a rate of payroll subsidy that we just haven't done with any other business, and I don't think we can afford to start doing with every business that asks for it.
Now, you were on the you were a leader of the Beloit Council until 2015. Mm-hmm. My question is levy limits. Local governments have had them for about 15 years. Do we get rid of them? Do we ease them back, or do we keep them?
I think we need to ease them back. We need to give local government some control over its own funding, and more importantly, we need to increase shared revenue so that it's not all falling on local property taxpayers. We need to make sure that the state is picking up its share, and we all know local government costs are going up. Everybody's costs are going up, and the state needs to keep pace with that and give some flexibility, but also give some more funding.
Okay, let's talk about highway funding. Your city would like to have the interstate expanded, but and there's work on that, but long range, how would you pay for highway maintenance and construction?
Well, we need more revenue going toward transportation. We passed a constitutional amendment that makes sure that any money that goes toward that has to be spent on transportation. That was supposed to pave the way for actually putting more money into it, but that hasn't happened. And that's something that I've supported since I got here, because if we pick between doing the interstate or paving local roads, fixing potholes, doing rural town roads, that's a false choice, and we're going to lose either way. We need to do both. We need to figure out how to fund both, and I support having all the options on the table, and I'm willing to vote to do that next session.
Well, your city's on the border, of course, with Illinois. Does that include tolling?
I don't think tolling is the best way for a number of reasons, because there's a delay in getting the revenue. There's a lot of upfront capital costs. I think looking at the gas tax, which also would certainly get money from people coming in from Illinois, is probably the most immediate and obvious way to do this. But I'm not ruling anything out. But I think tolling is not my first choice on that one.
You voted against a budget that did, according to the governor, provide a significant increase in K-12 school aids. Did it provide enough? And if you're reelected, what would you push for in the next budget for K-12 school aids, Mark?
I don't think that K-12 school aids were enough in the most recent budget, and more importantly, education funding takes 13 years. We can't cut in one budget and then put back in the next and expect that we're going to successfully educate kids. We need to sustain that increased funding over the long term so that we can give schools the resources they need every single year so that a kid going through for 13 years gets a great education. So we need to maintain and increase that investment in the next budget. I've supported Tony Evers' fair funding plan. I think that with Tony Evers as governor, we have an opportunity to really achieve a new investment in public education, and I want to be here in the legislature to partner with him and do that.
Mr. Evers' plan would include a $600 million increase in special ed. How would you and other Democrats pay for that?
Well, look, there's a lot of money that we've been leaving on the table. When you look at not taking the Medicaid expansion, which would not only provide more health care affordably to many of our hardworking residents, it would also save hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and we've foregone many hundreds of millions over the time that I've been in the legislature by not taking that money. Now, that's a place that I would certainly start. There are other things. We can look at some of the tax credits that we're giving to big businesses that I don't think are really creating jobs, that really aren't doing what they were intended to do, and make sure that everybody's paying their fair share. I think there are a number of places that we can get that money, and when I hear from businesses that say they want educated workers, I think making that investment in public school to make sure they have that is better than some tax breaks that really aren't leading to the outcomes we want.
Let's get to healthcare in a minute. A follow-up on K-12. You have seen in your terms in the Assembly choice, the voucher plan expanded. What should be in the next budget in terms of vouchers and the choice program?
We need to phase out the voucher plan. I would certainly let
even
students...
for Milwaukee and Racine? Milwaukee, where it started 30 plus years ago? Excuse me for interrupting.
At a minimum, the statewide voucher program, which is what I'm most concerned about in my district, seeing the impact of that on our local public school funding. But I think we need to take a hard look at vouchers overall, because I think any time that you're saying we need to get kids out of the public school system because they're not getting a good education there just means that you're draining funding for the kids who remain in that public school system. And we need to reinvest in those public schools, make sure that every kid has the opportunity to succeed. And we're not going to do that by trying to fund two school systems, whether it's statewide or anywhere else. So I think we need to take a hard look at that. But statewide, I would absolutely begin to phase that out in the next budget. Let kids who are already in voucher schools finish their education, but don't let new kids into that program and start putting that money back into our public schools where it belongs.
The $100 million that was approved for school safety grants, do you think it will make our schools safer, question number one, or do we need to change gun laws?
We need to do both. I supported the $100 million for school safety grants. I think that's something that is certainly making building improvements, making school security upgrades is important, but no security upgrade is going to stop somebody who's determined on getting into that school with a gun. And we also need to do everything we can to keep guns out of the hands of people who intend to do harm with them. I think that something that most people agree on, most gun owners agree on, is that there are some people who, because of their criminal background or other issues that make them likely to do harm, shouldn't be able to buy guns, and yet we have loopholes in our background check system where they can. I support universal background checks. I support closing that loophole. That's just the first place to start, but it's the obvious one, and I voted in this last session to try to get that done. We were blocked in doing that, but we absolutely have to do that, and then we have to look at other things that would, again, make sure not that we're taking guns from law-abiding gun owners, but that we're keeping guns out of the hands of people who mean to do harm with them.
Now let's talk about health care. So the number one change that Wisconsin should make is to apply for the Medicaid expansion and the additional federal dollars?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the first place to start. There's plenty more that we can do, but when there's money on the table that we are just not taking, it's our tax dollars we've already paid to the federal government, and instead of taking it back to provide affordable health care to our residents, we're just leaving it on the table, and that's a mistake. We need to reverse that mistake, take that money as soon as possible, cover more people, and then use that savings to fund other priorities, whether that's in health care, education, or somewhere else. I also think we need to protect pre-existing conditions as a matter of state law. We know that there's action at the federal level to potentially repeal those protections, and I support legislation to make sure that everybody in Wisconsin who has a pre-existing condition has access to health care coverage. There are other things we can certainly look at, like a public option to buy into Badger Care for people who want to use that as an insurance option. That's something I also support. But let's start with the Medicaid expansion, because those are our dollars and we should take them and cover people.
Would that be the best way to guarantee that rural health care is continued and maybe improved, taking the federal money for expansion?
That would certainly help. There are a lot of low-income working people who would qualify for that expansion who live in rural areas, and we certainly also need to look at reimbursement rates for Badger Care for Medicaid to our hospitals to make sure that rural hospitals and urban hospitals who are working with a lot of Medicaid patients can keep their costs covered, so that's something we should look at as well. I've supported increasing those reimbursement rates also for dental care so that more providers will be available in communities that need it to serve those patients. But absolutely, that's one thing we need to do. We also need more broadband so that telemedicine can continue to increase. In many cases, the most efficient thing is not going to be for a rural patient to go to a brick and mortar clinic. It's going to be for them to go online, potentially even on their phone, and use telemedicine to talk to a doctor and get some of those basic needs taken care of.
So state government has a obligation to help retain and recruit healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals?
Absolutely, and we have some programs that help with that, helping with some of the loan costs associated with that. I think we should do more in that regard, and also make sure that we're providing enough funding for those base level care providers, our CNAs that we know there's a shortage of, that just aren't getting paid enough. I mean, they're leaving to go work at Starbucks because they're not getting paid enough to be CNAs. We need to address that issue.
Let's talk about the corrections budget. A number of the Democratic candidates for governor said we could cut our prison population, now about 23,000, in half. Are you one of those Democrats? Question one. Question two, do we need a new state prison with the prisons in Green Bay and Waupun built in the 1800s?
So I absolutely believe we can reduce our prison population in half. We need to both be looking at how we identify people who are already in prison who are eligible for probation, parole, but haven't received it, people who perhaps are aging and keeping them in prison is just not necessary for public safety and is not the most cost-effective way to take care of them. So there are a lot of ways that we can look at reducing that. We also need to stop the pipeline of people into prison who either haven't committed violent crimes or have committed crimes that are better off being dealt with in community supervision and trying to more quickly reintegrate people into the community. As far as a new prison, I'm okay with replacing aging prisons so that we improve conditions and make sure, to the extent that we still need those prison beds, that we're housing people in appropriate facilities. And at some point that is going to have to happen. What I don't want to do is see any net increase in the number of prison beds in Wisconsin. We need to be decreasing that as we reduce the prison population, not building a new prison so we can increase the prison population.
Is it time to legalize either medical marijuana and recreational marijuana? Either or?
I support legalizing medical marijuana. I think there's broad support in the state for that, and there are a lot of people who have healthcare conditions that really feel that they would benefit from that. As far as recreational marijuana, I'm very open-minded on that. We're going to have a referendum in Rock County, which covers a significant part of my district this November. I'm anxiously awaiting the results of that. So far, surveys of my constituents have been pretty split down the middle of that, and I'm going to be watching that vote closely because I think that'll be a hot topic in the next session.
UW system budget. Do we need to continue the tuition freeze?
You know, we need to make sure that the UW system is funded and that it's affordable, and whether that's through a tuition freeze or allowing tuition to gradually increase but providing more need-based financial aid, I think we need to make sure that it's affordable, but we know that the UW's costs are going up, and if we leave a tuition freeze in place, we have to fund that freeze, and that's something that just hasn't been done. In fact, the governor cut a significant amount, $250 million over a two-year budget out of the university system while putting in the tuition freeze, and that means we're losing programs, we're losing faculty and staff, and we've seen the results of that. We've seen the results of that with UW Extension as well, in terms of county-level agriculture educators not being replaced. So if we're going to keep the freeze, we have to fund it, but we also have to keep college affordable, and I think need-based aid might be the better way to do that.
Last question. Differences between you and your opponent on November 6th?
I think one of the biggest differences, my opponent has proposed eliminating the state income tax and funding, having local government funded purely by property taxes. I think that would be a real mistake, especially for a community like Beloit, which is one of the highest state aid cities and highest state aid school districts. We really benefit from that formula, and frankly, that formula is just the fair thing to do across the state. It might need adjustment, but we know that many communities have very high property tax bases and would benefit from just funding themselves with property tax, but many others don't, and we believe that every kid across the state of Wisconsin should get a great education no matter what school district they're born into, that every city should be able to meet its basic needs no matter what their property tax base is. That's why we use the state income tax and the shared revenue formula, the school aids formula, to fund those, and I absolutely support maintaining and increasing the level of state support for that, not putting that burden all on local property taxpayers.
Democratic Representative Mark Spreitzer of Beloit is a candidate for re-election in Assembly District 45. The election is November 6th. Mark, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.